So while we transition between panels, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce our keynote speaker. Cameron Schuler is the executive director of the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute and unquestionably one of the leading minds in Edmonton, if not in North America and the world, on artificial intelligence today. Cameron's multifaceted career with roles as COO, CFO, president, and CEO has spanned industries including alternative energy, consumer goods, information technology, investment sales and trading, life sciences, manufacturing, medical devices, and oil and gas, and somehow I said that all in one breath. Previously, Cameron was the executive in residence at Tech Edmonton, and he is the co-founder and CEO of VibeDX Diagnostic Corp. He's also a member of the A100, a community of technology entrepreneurs working to support Alberta's next generation of startups. And without further ado, I will hand the floor over to him.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be the keynote speaker here. It is an honor, and I'm very grateful. So I am not a lawyer. I am married to one. I co-founded a law firm with my wife. But if you want to know whose far greater skill and ability is this, it's certainly my wife. Anyhow. Today I'm going to talk to you about AMI, which is our research group at the University of Alberta. I want to talk about AI in Canada, what is AI, things like that. I was given a list of kind of some of the things that have come up earlier, since unfortunately I wasn't able to attend the whole conference. But I'm going to make sure there's a Q&A session. And so feel free to ask me whatever questions. But I think the biggest piece is, what does my future look like? So I do address that, but I'm also happy to talk about kind of the way we look at it. So the province of Alberta has invested $40 million in AI at the University of Alberta in the last 15 years. And we're incredibly grateful for that because we have something here that nobody else has. In the last federal budget, there was an announcement for $125 million going into AI in Canada. And it's ourselves and our partners Mila in Montreal and Vector in Toronto. And we do work as a team. We actually meet every week and we look at how Canada can actually win at AI. So we actually do lead the world. So here's two incredibly famous people. The guy on the left is a guy named Jeff Hinton. Bloomberg actually picked him as one of the top 100 people and leaders in the world this year. So Jeff, we know quite well. He's at the U of T, or he's involved with U of T. He's actually with Google Brain, but nonetheless, he's actually a scientific advisor to Vector, which is our partner in Toronto. And then Yoshua Benji out of the University of Montreal. But here's another very famous person. His name is Rich Sutton, and he's here at the University of Alberta. So of some of the biggest names in the world, 3 of them are in Canada. So our goal is to enable computers to make good decisions in ambiguous environments and uncertain situations. So that's a very ambiguous statement. I promise to give you some clarity to that. So what's important to our research is a whole bunch of technical things that are important. But the piece I want to leave you with is the important part is human augmentation. How do we make you better at what you do on a daily basis? So at a glance, we've been around since 2002. We are here at the University of Alberta. We are ranked number 2 in the world in the field of artificial intelligence. We're very proud of that, and it's something that we've worked very hard on. And we have roughly 120 people. So we have 10 in computing science, 1 in public health, 1 in medicine. We are recruiting more people, and it will actually expand our group with inside all of the university, not just computing science. Our raison d'etre is certainly academic excellence. So we publish in the top conferences, top journals, but we also look at it saying, how do we create an ROI for Alberta? So the reality is that we've trained incredible people that go to Google, Facebook, Microsoft, etc., but the opportunities just haven't existed here. So part of what we're building out is an AI ecosystem in Edmonton, because we want to be able to create something incredible here. These are our people. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. So Rich Sutton is the inventor of something called reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning comes from the field of psychology, and there's 2 ways to look at it. So one is a reward mechanism. So you reward a person for good behavior, penalize them for bad behavior. Yes, we do that with a computer. We don't run around with a stick hitting it, just to be clear. Second part of it, which is easier to understand, is can you give a computer a goal, and then can you actually ask it to modify its behavior to achieve that goal? And the answer is yes. So Rich, according to the Allen Institute for AI, which is Paul Allen, one of the founders of Microsoft, he is the 11th most influential researcher in all of computing science, and his textbook on reinforcement learning, which you can download off his website, is the single most important publication in all of computing science. Here's one of our younger researchers, Mike Bowling. So Mike is known for computational game theory. He created a couple different fields that are pretty interesting. So one is Atari Learning. I'll show you an example. But the important piece on this slide is that Google bought DeepMind because of the Atari Learning. It originated here at the University of Alberta. Second part is Mike actually focuses on heads-up limit poker, or focuses on poker and other games. So in 2015, we solved heads-up limit poker. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on. It's a pretty small game, relatively speaking, 10 to the 14th in terms of decision making. But it took 1,000 core years. So a single core computer, 1,000 years, or over a bunch of computers, it took 4 months. We played 1 million hands a second, and it's a really, really big program. So it's 23 terabytes, you can actually play it online. Fast forward 2 years, we actually can beat pros at heads up no limit, but you'll notice it's a much, much larger game. So again, way more decisions to make. So we haven't solved that game. There just isn't enough computing power to be able to do that. But having said that, it took half the time in terms of core years, more powerful computers. But the really cool thing is you don't need that big back end, right? So again, a 23 terabyte program. This computer has half a terabyte on it. So you sit there and think what that is in terms of size. And being able to transfer it over to something like this that has a GPU, an i7 chip, and be able to function is pretty incredible. So again, being able to take all that learning and transfer it into something much smaller. So advances in hardware were going to be probably a pretty big thing for us as well. Two things about Mike and Rich as well. So I do talk about AlphaGo a little bit further on, but there was the competition in 2016 about the Chinese game or the Asian game called Go. And the origins of that are actually also University of Alberta in terms of the computational research. So Rich, Sutton, and another professor, Martin Mueller, were the supervisors of David Silver, and then some of the other team members Mike also supervised. So again, long history of incredible research done at the University of Alberta. So how did we get here? Well, what do I mean by here? What's called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or what's being called the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So initially computers were one stream of data, and that stream was fairly small in terms of its volume. As time went on, that volume increased dramatically, but it was still just one source. And today there's multiple sources and the volume is incredibly high. So we all walk around with a cell phone, has a bunch of different sensors, lots of different things have sensors in them. So again, the volume of data is really challenging. What this means is we can no longer engineer systems because they are too complex. We need systems that help us do that. But you can have an incredibly intelligent system that doesn't have any learning in it. So if I take a look at why learning is important, you know where you are today and where you want to get to. It's just unclear of how you're going to get there. Next part is the complexity is so high you have no idea how you can get your result. The third part is things change. So GMO, who we know fairly well, one of our professors is actually an advisor to Ross. He talked about supervised learning. So you start with a training data set, so you know what the data is, you build a model on that. But when you show it something new, it has a lot of challenges because it actually hasn't seen that data before. So again, this adaptability piece is incredibly important. So what is AI? You can read this. The simplest way I look at it is a system that can do things that would require human level skill. We won't use the word intelligence. We also have horrible naming conventions in our field, like artificial intelligence. It's a sci-fi term. In reality, something like cognitive computing or things like that would be much more helpful. But the best example that we have of AI, I think, is autonomous vehicles. So you take an autonomous vehicle, it's got a whole bunch of different sensors in it. You have a GPS that locates where you are in the world. You then have a system like Google Maps. It doesn't have to be Google Maps, there are other providers, but Google Maps precision in an XYZ coordinate is actually to a centimeter or an inch. So it's actually that precise all over the world where they've mapped. So again, you have where are you globally, where are you in a much more precise area. You then have vision systems. So again, to be able to define where you are. Ultimately, you have other sensors. So where are there cars? The cars talk to each other because you don't want to end up like this group. So again, when you think about some of the complexity in this, there's a lot of different data sets that need to work together. One of the other components of this really is that when I talk about ambiguous things, do you ever think about where you put your steering wheel when you drive? I think probably not, I don't. But if I'm in a school zone, I put it very differently than if I'm in a 4-lane highway. So each one of these is considered what we would call a state space. So a school zone is going to have maybe cars along the side, kids, there's more complexity to it. 4-lane highway, maybe there's nobody there, maybe it's really busy. Each one of these you'd actually have to tell the computer what to do in each different place. So the challenge is that ambiguous thing that we do with the steering wheel, you have to tell the car where do you put the steering wheel. Forget about distances that you keep, forget about speed and all the other things that are appropriate. So those are fairly ambiguous environments. So that's what we mean by that. So what is machine learning? It is a subset of artificial intelligence. So you have a computer, whoop, fat fingers. I used to work as a trader. Fat fingers is a very bad term. So you have a computer on the one side, and it's going to actually cause an action. So it's going to forecast or something like that, and something's going to happen in the world, and then it needs to come back and understand what happened. So it's kind of this loop where it's learning from experience and adapting to its environment. Here's a graphical example. Now you're going to see a term up here that says online learning. Our naming conventions are horrible, just like artificial intelligence. That means real-time learning. So this is from an adaptive prosthetic project. So we work with amputees to help make them better than they were before. It's conceivable that at some point you sit there and say, I'd actually rather have bionic limbs than what I actually have. But I don't think I'm ever going to get there. So if we take a look at the red line is what the computer thinks is going to happen, and the gray line is what actually happens in terms of controlling this arm. After 10 minutes of learning, you're going to see this actually follows each other much more closely. So the graphing is much more consistent. To try to engineer that is a huge problem. So again, when I start talking about poker, the heads-up limit poker being 10 to the 14th, a Rubik's Cube, which is really tiny, is 10 to the 16th. So you start saying, how do I actually program all these things? Because the complexity is so high, it is problematic. So learning helps us do things like this that we actually couldn't do. So what about AI we use today? Things like Netflix. Netflix works off a very large training data set. They have 95 or so thousand terms that they categorize movies with. That's how they can sit there and say, because you like this, you probably like this. I actually don't think it's that good, but it's better than not having something like that. Second thing would be Siri. The third one would be Amazon. People that bought this also bought this, or people that bought this or looked at this then went on to buy this. So some of the challenges that we have, and I am going to talk about challenges more so because we get most of our information about AI from science fiction. It isn't real. It's not close to real. And I'm happy to address anything we talk about ethics and AI in the Q&A. So with Amazon over in the UK, people that were buying a particular chemical, it popped up saying, well, they also bought this chemical as bomb-making materials. So while it was correct, it probably needs some influence in there to say, well, we probably don't really want to help people get there. So again, these are some of the things that are just complex problems. It doesn't have to be a learning system. You could engineer that. It's just much harder to engineer. We generally don't think about spam filters as artificial intelligence, but we can all remember a time when our email was so full of crap it just didn't work. Now we get lots of stuff that we just can't deal with because the volume's too high. That's another AI problem. Here's another example where we are way more comfortable with a computer running things than we are a human. So from 1992 to today, we are twice as safe flying. And in fact, for large commercial airlines, there were no fatalities last year, which is pretty incredible. If you showed up at the airport and your pilot said, our computer's not running, but we're going to go anyhow, pretty sure you wouldn't want them to go, and they wouldn't be allowed to take off. But one of the interesting things about this is, if you let the computer do everything, pilot error, because pilot error is still the #1 cause of incidents, pilot error actually becomes a problem. So they actually found if the pilots were not engaged enough, things didn't work. So there's a component of this where you have to keep the human in the loop to get the optimal result. So this is probably a bigger piece. I was at presenting to TD Bank executives, and there was a guy at a U of T law school who has a company called Blue Jay. So he said all his students are quite panicked. Should they even finish law school? The answer is yes, in my opinion. So I think work will change, and I'll talk about that. But let's take a look at historically how things, and this isn't a plug for the School of Law, just to be clear. That is an opinion of mine. And I say that with every field, right? It could be engineering, it could be medicine. Everyone's worried about this. So let's take a look at some headlines. These actually came from Tom Sides. He and I used to work together at Intuit. So here we are talking about things taking away our jobs, greater speed and accuracy, supplanting knowledge from 1898. So we always are threatened by technology. Here's another one, new era of production combining computing, automated self-regulation. Down at the bottom, which I didn't highlight, cyber nations already reorganizing the economic and social system. Oh look, 1964. Linus Pauling's a Nobel laureate. This person also became one, and then Gerard was also the scientific editor, Scientific American publisher. And actually in the mid-50s, there were lots of forecasts that computers were coming and they would be robots. So it really was the Jetsons kind of vision, and it really was computers are going to be able to do, think, and really replace humans. I'd like to take another look at this in a different way. This is what we used to do to people. Notice the gender. The reality is that if you take a look at the automation by adding computers, we no longer needed this task and we could redeploy people in much more lucrative, useful areas. So it's about the higher value tasks. So that's the important piece. Let's take a look at communications. If our current communication system was still manual, there's no way any of this would work. So the question is, what about the speed of change? And yes, that's off a motorcycle I used to own. Oops. So how rapidly are things going to happen? Well, let's take a look at Germany as an example. It is the third most automated country in the world. It is the fifth largest economy. In 2004, its unemployment rate was over 10%. And I actually got to hear a guy from McKinsey present this very thing, but he was quite wrong. He was using old data, and it was actually recently. It was kind of shocking. He said, Germany is losing jobs because of automation. That is incorrect. Germany has the lowest unemployment rate in all of Europe. So again, they've learned how to leverage technology and how to actually make themselves more efficient through it. So again, when you think about my background, investment, sales, and trading and economics. So again, when I take a look as, I put on the hat of an economist, it's how do you actually lever and actually accelerate your growth? And computers and systems actually allow us to do that. So I think there's way more positives coming out of this. Now let's take a look at another area where we actually function in. So something like schizophrenia, it's very hard to diagnose. In fact, most medical conditions are quite hard to diagnose because there aren't good diagnostics out there. So we had a publication last year in Nature, which is an important publication, Nature Schizophrenia, that we can actually help them diagnose schizophrenia better. And what that means is instead of trial and error for the treatment, we're in a position where we can actually understand what is the best treatment and provide better treatment pathways to patients. So why does this matter? We're all about humans. We still have the monkey brain, the reptilian brain. We interact with other humans. You can't replace, you could replace humans, but in reality, if humans, we need actually doctors to spend more time with humans and less time trying to figure out what's going on with them, because it's a much better use of their time. So think about that in terms of the law, right? You have somebody, so let's say you do litigation, somebody comes in, they're totally panicked, their life is falling apart. Right? Just talk to the computer, it's going to be fine, right? This is what you as humans do that actually help you build a practice. When I sold investments, it was about building relationships, it's about getting people's trust, it's all those sorts of components. Here's another example. So this is actually tuberculosis. So tuberculosis in the Western world is not a problem. It rears up occasionally, but it kills millions of poor people every year. So one of our researchers worked with a group over in Thailand, and they developed a system that's $2,000 or $3,000. It's very safe for technicians to use it. And the second piece of this is that it's super cheap. So 100 people for 20 bucks. So now poor people no longer have to die from TB. You can actually start containing it. So how do you make people's lives better? This really is the focus that we have. Some of the challenges. These are challenges outside of my fat fingers today. So many things are thought to be trivial. So we have this man to blame for the term artificial intelligence. His name is John Mccarthy, and back in 1956 or 57, they met at Princeton with a few others to say, we're going to solve a bunch of problems. Here's another guy named Marvin Minsky. And so Marvin, it's interesting, Rich Sutton actually sent a letter to Marvin Minsky. So Rich is about 60. He sent a letter to Marvin Minsky when he was in high school. What you're doing is really, really interesting in AI. How do I go about this? So he sent him a letter back saying, good luck. There aren't programs. So Rich actually went and studied psychology at Stanford. So anyhow, there's a history with a number of people with these guys. But the reason I have Minsky's picture and name on here, he was still at MIT. He died, I think, in 2015. So here is a trivial problem in AI. So 1966, and keeping in mind the father of the field is actually a guy named Alan Turing, who died in 1954. So Minsky hires a first-year undergrad student to solve computer vision. So they set up a computer, had a camera watching it. By the end of summer, we'll have this solved. It still isn't solved today. So again, things are thought to be fairly simple, but they're actually quite hard. Now, I was referring to Atari games earlier, not just because I wasted a ton of my youth on it, just to be clear. But it's a really cool field. So if we go back to reinforcement learning, There's a couple things that are neat about this. So you have a joystick with 18 actions, so it's fairly simple, and we let it look at screen pixels, and the thing that it's trying to influence is the score. So that's the important part of this. So this is what's known as unsupervised learning. We do not tell it how to play the game. So there's a bunch of games that it can't play. So this is a game called Breakout. And if you take a look, this is 100 games. It's really horrible at playing this game, but you're going to watch this continue on. But again, what's important about this is a really simple game. You can move left and right. You can actually influence the way the ball moves by how you move your little blocker across the bottom. And you start with shooting it. So again, I think we're either 200 or 400 games here. So it's pretty jittery. That was 200. 400, it's still going to be jittery. It's a little bit better. But the really neat thing about this is that soon you're going to see it actually come up with a strategy. Now, I was at a conference with a guy from a very large tech company who's a senior exec in the AI space, and he was trying to tell people this is sentient computers. It is not. It's a computer that plays a video game. But what's really neat about this is it does figure out a strategy. So again, it's trying to maximize its reward, which is score, and it knows by popping it up in the top that this is how it's going to maximize its reward. And it actually gets to the point where it plays better than any human. So why is this important? Well, the field of computational game theory actually comes from war games, and it just gives us a safe environment to practice a lot of things. Computers eliminate time. So when I was talking earlier of playing 1 million hands a second, you would need billions of people to be able to do that in a poker game. So how would you actually replicate that? You can't. So now I'm going to show you another version of Breakout. And on the Atari 2600, there was a switch between kind of hard and easy. This is the hard game. So what I showed you before that built a strategy can't play this game. So you can't transfer that knowledge over to play this game. It doesn't work. So this is something that for us is the same game. For the computer, it's so completely different, it just doesn't work. So again, there's something called transfer learning. There's again, more of the horrible naming conventions, AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. So could you actually take a system and get it to do different things? Here's an example of, well, we're a long way away from that. Again, very simple game. So next thing is data. So computers do this better than we do in a very short period of time, which are cats and which are ice cream. So it's actually a very consistent pattern. It's cat, ice cream, and it's the same on the way down as well. So again, a computer will actually be better than humans if you give them a couple seconds to look at it. Given long enough time, you can. This one's a little harder. This one is a dog, but it took me a minute to figure it out. There's tons of these on there. Again, to me, they look pretty similar. So again, this is part of the problem we have with data is this. So this is something we have at home. Is this a teacup? Is it a mug? Is it a glass? The answer is yes. I put coffee in it. I put tea in it. It also is made of glass. So when you label things with data, the problem is it's always an interpretation. It's never, ever, ever a label. So again, we all have different perspectives on these things. So again, these are open problems in the space. So what exactly is this? So again, labeling data. Now I'm going to take you to another one, which is even worse. So I spent 3 times working for a Canadian bank, once as a banker. Here's a place in Houston. So if traditionally your credit adjudication was based on we don't lend to people in this area and that's your training data, you're just going to reinforce the fact that people are never going to be able to get out of where they are. So here you can see this house is falling apart. It probably isn't a very good neighborhood. Doesn't mean there aren't good people there, but it will just continue to reinforce that. Maybe they don't like bald guys, right? Again, so all these characteristics you've used in the past can actually be reinforced. So data is a huge problem, and bias in data is a huge problem. So now let's think about your future. So no, I'm not telling you to become a chess pro, but this guy is actually from the University of Alberta. Again, long history in computational game theory. So this game size is 10 to the 50th. Here's alpha. This is the game of Go. So the board is 19 by 19, and the goal is to surround your partner. This one is 10 to the 171st. So it is not solved, but it's something where we're able to beat humans. And some of the interesting things are early forecasts on how fast technology would advance. So I think it was Minsky was about 10 years shorter for the game computers being able to beat people in chess. But as time went on, we got better. This has actually accelerated quite a bit. Here's another group at the University of Alberta. So checkers is the biggest game to ever be solved. This is the team that did it. It only took 18 and a half years, so pretty quick. It is the largest game to be completely solved. You cannot beat this program. You'll either tie it or it'll beat you every single time. And in 2007, one of the top 10 scientific discoveries of the year. This is Mike Bowling, again, computational game theory. So what's important about poker that's different than all the other games? You can see a whole chessboard, you know where all the pieces are. Go, checkers, whatever game. They're all, you get complete information about the game itself. The rules are well defined. Poker has well-defined rules as well. But at best, with heads-up limit poker, which I hate, I call it Go Fish for adults, the most you're going to see is 7 cards of 52, if it's one-on-one. So that's the most information. So all the other information is obfuscated. So now you have to figure out from other things, who is this player, what do they play like? What are the cards that I already know? How are they bidding? This program will actually figure out how to fake you out, by the way. It will actually bluff. But in terms of taking a look at this is why I think it's the biggest advancement in AI, because there's a whole bunch of incomplete, ambiguous things you have to deal with. I don't know if anyone recognizes this. I wouldn't have before last night when I pulled the picture. Supreme Court in Japan. So Randy Goebel, who's one of our professors, actually has a program that in legal reasoning, we are the best in the world with that can pass the Japanese bar exam in a yes or no scenario. It sounds cool because it's in Japanese. We use Google Translate. So I'll give away a little secret there. But again, it's something that there's a component of reasoning that comes along with it. But keeping in mind, it's like a true-false. This was billed as the first Robo-Advisor. I don't know if you're familiar with what this is. It's called Do Not Pay. So the headline a couple years ago was Stanford student creates the first legal chatbot or lawyer chatbot. So the interesting thing, when I took a little bit of a look into this, my understanding is in New York City, they give a lot of tickets that they shouldn't. To me, that's an ethical issue, or at the very least, a function issue. So quite frankly, you take pictures of what happened, it'll then send it off, and I think they got 160,000 people out of their tickets. That's fine, there's a way of dealing with that. They're launching elsewhere, so they are in Canada, so they're in Vancouver, for example. Vancouver no longer accepts digital submissions of this thing, so the world will continue to change, right? If it's really easy to do this, then all of a sudden the volume of data is hard to deal with. But I think it's an interesting concept. But let's go back to Napoleon trying to make the law binary, right? So again, these are things where you get paid for how you deal with people, coming up with inventive new ways of doing things that fit into the law. A lot of what we do, or pretty much all we do, is around decision making. It's like applied mathematics is really what we do. It's like economics. It's like behavioral economics. It's like philosophy. It's about decision making. So that's kind of where I see a lot of this fitting in. So how do we move forward? I don't really believe this is entirely our future. This is out of our lab and know that robotic hand can't do that, but it's a cool picture. So I don't believe the robots are coming to take us out. I think our future is pretty incredible. So what industries are ripe for disruption? Anything with lots of data in a computer-readable format. Banking and finance is a really obvious one, right? So my assistant in banking, who would now be in her 70s, when she was 19, worked for Royal Bank actually inputting data in their computer system. So again, this is stuff that banking's been doing for a long time. Capital markets, certainly insurance, accounting and audit. I think legal, there's a place for this, absolutely. And there's going to be other areas. So what do you actually need to implement AI? So you got to understand what data you have. If you don't have data, you can't do anything. So I have an example of showing price sensitivity and inventory management. So it's called yield management, and how a company actually more than doubled their revenues in a 2-year period. They doubled it the first year, increased 35% the next year. And it was in the car rental business. There's one of our grads that did this. So I had some guys that had apartments that were like, that's incredible, we want to do this. Okay, what data do you have? Oh, we don't collect it. Right? So there's a bunch of these components. You have to start with data. Without data, you have nothing. Second part of it is, what is ground truth? So what do you do today? So we have a project on the investment management side where a ETF provider actually opened up their algorithms to us, and we're looking at, can we actually optimize those and make those better? So that's a good starting point for us because we know what we're trying to beat. So in that case, it could be a benchmark index, but it could actually be his existing performance because he is a Morningstar 5-star rated fund, so he generally beats the market. What results do I want? Or put another way, what problem am I actually trying to solve? And then what actions can I take? If I can't take any actions, then what am I going to do with this, right? So there's a bunch of components you need. So it's far from simple. Lots of models need what we call care and feeding. There's models that companies like Google use that they have to maintain every single day. Your data changes. It's a pretty laborious process at this point in time. So what are the opportunities? So what do you have that's automated today? We take a look at how you can actually optimize the automation. So where do we use data to make decisions? We as humans do this all the time. Every time I press this button, I expect this to go forward. If it doesn't, I'm kind of surprised. I'm forecasting this button moves my slides. Same if it's a locked door. You go to open it. I'm used to it being unlocked. I now walk into the door because it was something different than what I thought. Where do you use prediction? So prediction is another one. I certainly have financial examples up here, but anywhere we use prediction. This one I think is pretty cool on the legal side. So let's talk about computational game theory. So I remember settling a case where I had an injury from a car accident. So you go and they go, fine, we'll give you a check for $15,000. Clearly not acceptable. All right, I want more. We're not going to give you any more. Now I have to go find a lawyer. Fortunately, easy for me to find one. But who turns around and then sends a letter. Now they bump it up to $25,000. Lawyer gets a piece of the pie. I end up losing part of what I would have got. Maybe that's not the right approach to look at it, but maybe through actually modeling this stuff out, we could have realized that maybe $18,000 I would have settled, right? So the cost to everyone is lower. Unfortunately, lawyers lose out in this one. But let's take a look at I've been involved in some large litigation. One was $160 million, right? This is something that the company that had launched it, so it was multinational. They were a small company suing multinational. Multinational, 80 billion in revenue, small company under 10 million. So again, this is something where the small company absolutely wanted it to go to court because the other side was felt they were clearly in the wrong. It settled out of court. Could you model that out in terms of a probability of success, right? Again, you're not going to be perfect. And part of the problem with AI is, so if I think about a word processor, if I press A on my keyboard, I will get A on my computer screen. But now I've got something that's more ambiguous. I'm not entirely certain how this will play out. If we take a look at the poker example I gave you, that's one where we use probability. If we play one game, luck fits into it. If we play 10 games, luck fits into it. If we play enough games, it will win because we have it solved. So there's some other components that create some complexity around it. But the ability to actually model these things out and say, hey, let's actually take a look at our likelihood of, do we really want to go to court on this? Again, that's just a simple litigation example, but you can use it for any sort of exchange, economic exchange. So you probably can't read this at all. So this is somebody saying the bicycle is a curse. This is from the Kansas City Gazette in 1896. So again, people saying we hate technology. People are going to have a bunch of invalids riding around because bicycles are dangerous. So again, mankind being worried about the future. There was certainly commentary about horses in New York City and all the manure was a huge problem. Again, we think about how we need to solve problems to move forward and make life better. So I think disruption is absolutely an opportunity. It is clearly coming. There are certain questions you asked about junior lawyers. How do you train people, right? And I would argue, and I'm not a lawyer, just to be clear, but I would argue that as humans, we need a learning process. So again, myself and my business career, well, what point in time did I not have as many cringe-worthy moments as I did when I was younger, right? When was I confident enough to go in a room and say, I can do this? I'm a fairly confident person. I was pretty young, but nonetheless, you have to get punched in the face a few times, metaphorically speaking, to get better at things, right? So there's this learning component of how we function as humans. I also think it's about leverage. So if you take a look at an M&A transaction with 100,000 pages, previously you had articling students and your associates reading reams of things and you could bill for that. Now if you can actually do keyword searches, which you can do, taking a look for specific terms, maybe you now only have to read 20 or 30,000 pages, maybe even less. So while you're reducing the number of jobs, you're actually greatly increasing margins in what you can get out of it. So I think there's opportunities on both sides. And this is the one I really want to leave you with. This is from McKinsey & Company. So a third of all jobs today didn't exist 30 years ago. We didn't have Facebook 15 years ago, right? A bunch of these things that we actually interact with that didn't exist. So if we start taking a look at opportunities that we have as humans, every one of us that does a job that's been doing a type of job for 15 or 20 or 30 years, it's different today than it was before, quite clearly. So it's about leveraging technology and it's about figuring out how to interact with it in a more effective manner. So anyhow, that is the end of my presentation. I was told I had 30 to 60 minutes, so this is 33, and I probably spent 5 getting set up. So happy to answer any questions as best I can.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
I can make up really good answers.
come to one of these mics or that one over there, just so the recording.
YouTube, the rise of the legal chatbots. I guess you're familiar with the content of that, do not pay. And then the Russian brothers, 50,000 immigration applications processed with deliverables, $100 each, fully automated. What do you think about chatbots in law?
So I think it's interesting, if you take a look at, where does the value lie, right? It's simple economics, right? Do you want something that's fairly laborious just to keep people employed, or do you actually want to be able to provide value? And you're going to continuously have this push of opportunity cost, right? So I think there's a future to it. Again, if I take a look at how my parents have changed, my mom loves technology. She got an iPad the first day it came out. She was flying through the U.S., had somebody meet her at an airport with it. My dad, I'm sure, was dictating emails to my stepmom 5 years ago, right? So I think if we look at that human interaction, we're still humans. We still like to interact. I don't believe that our timelines will get shorter in terms of our work days. They're by far more complex. But I'd also argue we actually are more productive today too. So I think it fits. I think it fits into a niche. The question is, would you go in front of the Supreme Court on something that could impact the whole country with a computer system? You might want to be supported by it. Maybe it gets to that point at some point, but I believe that the law really is about interpretation, and it's, if you have two systems and each is going to create its argument, it becomes an arms race. So that could exist, but I think chatbots will fill something in there. And they're a fairly simple task. Again, if you look at immigration, with immigration, is this something you have to go and make an argument for, or is it something that's really just rote processing? And I think it's probably one or the other. Yeah, definitely.
Because if you've got clients that can't speak, if you've got clients that can't speak English very well,
Absolutely.
if you have clients that are not educated,
Yep.
that don't really understand or come from a background where you put down what you think the government wants to hear rather than what the actual thing is, and they're not used to Canadian norms, I think a lawyer adds a lot of value, and it's not just rote.
Oh, no, so
Yeah.
I can agree with you. You're talking about the human side of the business,
Yeah.
right? And so all of a sudden, if all you had was, so think about, so I was in San Francisco last June or whenever it was, and I couldn't check in. How hard is it to find an agent at the airport, right? So there's a component of that if you separate it out, all of a sudden, people aren't focusing on the customer experience. So I'm not saying what you do doesn't add value. What you're describing is the human aspect of this, right? And truly, without diminishing what you do as a lawyer, you obviously have deep understanding, but what you're deriving an income from is human, right? It's that human interaction. It's that holding somebody's hand when they're uncertain. It's that, we're all immigrants, right? Or for the most part we are. And so there's, when my family came over, I'm pretty sure they only spoke Estonian and German, right? So again, we didn't end up with Smith as a last name, but there's all sorts of things. So I think that goes back to the AI business is a human business, quite clearly, because it's, some of the arguments I've had with my group is that if we don't have a natural language processing piece to interact with humans, how is this AI, right? So there's some components of that. So I'm agreeing with you 100% that there is a value add, but you find the value add.
I've got a quick one. Every time I go to an AI conference or try and meet someone who is involved in AI research, I always like to ask the question, how far away do you think we are from artificial general intelligence, from AGI? If you had a best guess.
Best guess? Let me give you a test first, not a personal test, but the test so rather than the Turing test, and for those of you who don't know what the Turing test is, it's something along the lines of, can you fake 80% of the population that they're interacting with a 6-year-old or something like that? So a better example would be, can you go into 10 different houses and use everyone's different coffee maker? Like, that's actually something that they're really similar, but they're quite different. I believe AGI, we're probably 20, 30, 40 years away. I don't believe in sentient computers. I do believe that we are very complicated biological machines as humans. So I don't see computers becoming sentient, and then we start talking about philosophy, are we really or not? But I think we're decades away. If we look at the processing speed of the human brain, the average human brain relative to computers, I think we're probably still in the 15 to 20 years away based on Moore's law. So there's a bunch of those components as well. So I think we're a very long way away. If you take a look at what we do today, we use very general tools to do specific jobs. And really what we want is general tools to do very general things, and we can't. Not that I'm not an optimist.
So this is the university campus, and some of the jobs you set up there that are going to be impacted by AI is like accounting, law. If I'm a student, how could I prepare myself in my 4 years that I spent at the university here? What's one thing I should do to prepare for AI? I'm not a computer science student. I'm playing video games, I guess. But how could I prepare myself for this revolution we seem to be in the middle of right now?
Yeah, one thing that's really weird right now is that companies are trying to build their own AI, which leads me to believe that industry, it's because problems are actually hard to solve with it. So industry is having a hard time delivering meaningful products, is really what I think the answer is. So depending on the day you ask me is partly depending on my answer. Do you all need to learn how to code? I would say no. If industry is doing their job appropriately, and again, economics is pretty messy, right? If it's demand driven, being able to learn how to code is kind of like saying to be able to read, you need to know how to actually publish books, right, and distribute and sell them, right? So there should be something more natural. But I think it is important to actually take some computing science just to even understand how systems work. But it can be an intro to comp sci, and you can do that through Coursera, Udacity, or groups like that. One of our children did it in grade 4, and it was a literally first-year university course. So they're pretty easy to understand. They're kind of fun to play with. And just to give you more comfort, again, I find some of the age gap is people are afraid to break things, et cetera, et cetera. But it's kind of getting rid of the worry about what it brings and just being more comfortable with technology. So I think one of the biggest pieces is understanding what technology is coming and how can you actually leverage that. So again, if you're going into law, you're probably reading a lot. So expand your reading out to say what new technology is coming in law. So GMO's group like Ross Intelligence. How can you take Ross and actually change your practice? Because when I started selling investments, it's a very tough job, and it's no different than if you hang out your shingle as a lawyer, an accountant, a doctor. You have to build the clientele, right? You have to have all these other business skills. So again, you look at it and say, so my wife and I know a lawyer that probably, I don't know when he stopped practicing, but he was still using a dictaphone in the last 15 years, right? Didn't have a computer on his desk. So how can you actually understand what's coming and be an adopter of new technology and being just fluent in how those work? I think that's probably the best thing. It's kind of weird in that in the capital market. So one of our guys was speaking to incredibly senior people in the biggest firms you can imagine in the investment banking space. And I've spoken to a number of them as well. And they're terrified about losing their jobs. I think if you're doing your job well, you should be looking how to replace yourself, because then you'll have the opportunity to do the next thing. And that's how you optimize and win at what you're doing in your job, or for your employer or yourself, right? So if I'm in a position, I've been in jobs where I can't fix stuff. And so you end up, I had one job where I spent 35 hours a week in meetings, so evenings and weekends were my real work time. This wasn't going to change, so I went and did something else. If you go back to it, if you can actually fix these things and continually improve, you're advancing your company. So you start thinking about, how do I do more work in a shorter period of time? How am I better at my work? All these other things that fit into it. So it's really, how can you adapt technology to what you do? And those are the things I think will make you employable. I'm not always right, just to be clear. My best guess.
So you're from the financial, or you've got a background in the financial sector.
Yep.
Looking at kind of the potential latent stuff, I guess, that I'm familiar with in this field, like a lot of it seems to be coordination problems, adoption of digital signatures, blockchains, automated contracts. A lot of this stuff would seem to lend itself to the particular problems in that particular field, or perhaps in the accounting field, which I think was mentioned earlier as a potential disruptor. Is that where we might be looking at in terms of potential disruptive forces? Is the stuff that is kind of disrupting, say, the financial sector right now with regards to these people worried about their jobs, is it going to come from there? Is it going to start from there and like spread?
Yeah, so it's not a virus. So if I look at there was an Oxford study that looked at 500 different occupations, and it actually said that 96% of what accountants do can be automated. And so I presented last year to the annual auditors convention in Canada, and they're concerned about their future. And when I was talking about people worried about their jobs, I'm talking hedge funds, like people that are making millions of dollars for their brain. And I think it's ridiculous they don't go, how can I augment my brain to still win relative to everyone else? But so if you think about accounting, and I've been CFO of companies before, if you think about the auditing process, a lot of it is just testing and it's fairly manual. And accountants have always built tools to do this. So this is just a larger tool set. So it's, again, increasing the volume of things that come through. It's leveraging your time more effectively. And when you start looking at the value add, this is no different than in economics where you have comparative advantage between two countries is what they teach you, right? We produce more sheep per unit of energy and you produce more cotton per unit of energy. Let's trade. Right? Same sort of thing. And again, these things are never smooth and they're never elegant. But if you start taking a look at how the world will change, so let's take a look at an in-house lawyer versus somebody in a law firm. I could see over time that you could certainly replace some of the private practice with technology. Right? So if you're paying somebody to do a bunch of research for you and you can automate it, there's probably a gain there, which is not good for private practice, but it's actually good for in-house counsel, right? So again, I think as these things change, so yes, bad for private practice, but now maybe more people can actually get general counsel, right? If you take a look at that as a strategic role in a company, that all of a sudden you have another data point to pull on. When you start talking about the lens that I almost always approach things with a capital markets lens, right? In terms of how I make decisions, in terms of I think about optimization, all these things. And now all of a sudden you take somebody who looks at risk, right? Or other areas. So now you're expanding your brain trust inside your organization. So I think what it really means is a shift. So will we need less lawyers? Maybe. I think lawyers are pretty good at I don't want to say adding complexity because it's probably not fair, but expand, your job is to do the best thing you can do for your client. And if that's what it is, the practice of law should probably continue to expand. I get very frustrated with accountants in that they make a lot of the legislation, and a lot of the legislation leads to more business, right? So again, if you take a look at Sarbanes-Oxley, did it actually make people less crooked? No, it just made it harder for honest people to function, and it actually generated more revenue for accounting firms. So the intent was, let's never have this happen again. But the reality is, if you keep honest people honest, and you create other mechanisms to find the criminals, then that's certainly very different. So I'm not sure if I directly answered your question, but you're talking about how this technology spreads?
I guess I'm wondering, so some of us, I think, are invested in the idea that we want some of these innovations to take hold, to realize these efficiencies, to address some like access to justice issues and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And change is hard. So what's the driver? And it seems to me capturing the value of these changes is part of the trick. And I'm thinking an accountant firm, like maybe perhaps a law firm that's functioned as an kind of organelle inside an accounting firm that lays the groundwork for this stuff, might be conducive to producing these particular kind of changes and making it happen. I don't know. But yeah, if you want this kind of stuff to happen, is there a synergy there, I guess?
So potentially. I mean, I see a lot of accountants practicing law, right? So there's certainly been bleeding into that edge for a while, or into that space for a while. I think it goes back to basic business. What do you generate revenue for, right? So if you look at tools like a value chain, so again, Michael Porter, who's a professor at Harvard, what pieces of the value chain do you add value for? Do you add them in logistics, which is Amazon? Do you add them in volume? Do you add them in the way you do HR? All sorts of different pieces. If you look at your business as a lawyer, the same. Again, it's a people business. So in immigration, it's about being able to take people that can't stand up for themselves, right? So it's not people that are fluent and, again, they could actually do some of this work themselves. Most people are fearful of it as well, right? So there's other aspects to it. But But again, taking a look at it and saying, how can I actually add value to my clients? And, well, I don't know too many clients that don't complain about paying lawyers. They certainly don't complain about it when they're in trouble. They only complain about, you have to help me and it has to be today, right? So again, how do you actually show that value you're adding to the individual client to say, here's how we're actually making your life better? And maybe it does, so let's say you reduce your billables by 30%, but you increase your volume by 2x. You're better off, client's happy, right? So it's just figuring out how to leverage these things to make everyone's life better. And it's, again, when you think about dollar amounts, people generally don't overpay for things. If price is an objection on things, it's because you've never shown them the value, right? So again, if I want to sell you this piece of paper for $50, it better have something inside of it that's valuable, right? But you see it as something I'm probably going to throw away. So again, it's trying to figure out what actually is important to your client. In software, we call voice of customer, right? What do they actually care about? And then being able to say, what will people actually pay for? And then how can I leverage that? And that's the way I see this adoption happening is, your clients may or may not drive it, but your competitors probably will. Right? That's the piece where I think it'll come from.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much, Cameron, for coming to do the keynote and the Q&A. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Before I hand the floor over to Dean Payton to close out the conference, I wanted to just quickly say a personal thank you to the entire Law and Business Association who has helped organize this conference and has been invaluable in bringing the entire thing together, and to the staff at the Faculty of Law whom, without you, of course, we would not be here. None of this would be happening. So thank you all so much for the support you've provided. And to all of the law students in the room, especially my fellow 1Ls, my fellow first years, thank you for coming out, and thank you for being a part of this conference, and thank you for being dedicated to learning about the law and technology. And I hope that I will continue to see you at many such events in the future. So without further ado, Dean Payton.
Thanks very much, X. And I wanted to take this opportunity myself to congratulate the Law and Business Association, to thank the students for coming, and to thank all of our speakers. As you will have heard throughout the morning, the kind of dialogue and exchange that we're engaged in here is actually talking about not only our present and to a certain extent our past, but indeed our future, and a future that I'm really glad to be shaping in my capacity as Dean and to have worked with the Law and Business Association to pull together. It's caused me a bit of opportunity, and there were a couple of embedded questions in some of the questions talking about legal education that I actually want to respond to. And in part, my own story is reflected in some of this. I was an associate and partner at Davies, Ward & Beck in Toronto. And I remember when the memo came around that we were going to have fax machines at home and being worried about the encroachment on private space. I graduated from the Faculty of Law at the University of Toronto in 1992, so that's less than 25 years ago. And I think in terms of the manner in which the speed of technology, the speed of adoption, and the manner in which practice has changed, it's just phenomenal. There was a question about accounting firms. Between 1998 and 2004, I was with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I headed their multidisciplinary practice initiative that ended up in the establishment in Canada of an affiliated law firm practice, which is now PwC Law LLP. The accountant firms were on this in the mid to late 1990s. And the regulatory change and restrictions that people were talking about, the manner in which the legal profession and the regulators of the legal profession here and then in the US, to a lesser extent in the UK, have been responding to this, has made this a 20-year-plus journey. But I think that the dialogue is changing because the technology and those who are actually forcing the change, the clients, are making this a different dialogue, and it's important for us to learn. I spent 2001 to 2002 at Stanford, and what Stanford is now doing with design lab opportunities for law students is nothing short of phenomenal. It's introducing a different way of thinking, a different way of problem solving, a different way of engaging issues. And this is something that we need to incorporate and think about in legal education much more directly in Canada. Some are doing it. To a certain extent, we're nowhere close to where we need to be yet. And I was intrigued this week to be reading about a legal innovation index in legal education in the United States that has a sample group of 38 schools that are currently being tracked for innovation. They're looking at 10 different technology and legal service delivery disciplines. Things about teaching competencies in legal technology and innovation, data analytics, process improvement, technology basics, blockchain, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, e-discovery, and entrepreneurship in the law. 19 of them have centers, and they become a nucleus for this kind of dialogue, for the research, for reaching out into other areas on campuses that are deeply engaged in this issue. And so I'm very glad to have the participation of those from the #2 program in the world in artificial intelligence. For us, we're tracking change here as well. The Times Higher Ed World Rankings, actually, for us are a point of pride. We broke into the top 100 worldwide this year for the first time. Number 83, we'll celebrate number 83, but that's up 54 places in 2 years. We're on the edge of change, and it's the students who are going to end up driving that forward. And I think will continue to push us, just as some of our 1L students have pushed us to do this and to bring people together and to try and build on it. So I want to say thank you, to all of you, for being willing to engage at all ages and stages in this dialogue. I had a mentor at PricewaterhouseCoopers when I joined the firm. He was in his early 60s, and he was an early adopter and a model and a mentor for what can happen and what happens when you embrace, in later life or at indeed any stage, just the possibility of change. So I'm on the tail end of year 4 as dean. We've seen a whole lot of change here at the faculty. I'm really proud of this conference, and I do hope it will be the first of many that our students end up leading going forward. Thank you all indeed very much for joining us today.